My name is Julian Thompson. I'm 29 years old and I live in Boston, Massachusetts. For as long as I can remember, I've been what my family politely calls the mistake. Not directly to my face, of course, but I've heard the whispered conversations, seen the disappointed looks, felt the cold distance that comes with being the unwanted child. My brother Victor, 2 years older at 31, has always been the golden boy. The one with the perfect grades, the charm, the future that everyone believed in. Me? I was just there, taking up space, reminding everyone of their poor judgment. My grandmother Rose was different, though. She never made me feel like an accident. When everyone else saw failure, she saw potential. When I struggled through community college in my early 20s while Victor sailed through Boston University's business program, she offered me a part-time job, helping her with what she called paperwork. Nothing fancy, she said. Just organizing documents, making phone calls, keeping track of some investments. $25 an hour, cash. It was decent money for part-time work, and more importantly, it was time spent with the one person in my family who didn't look at me like I was a disappointment. For 3 years, from late 2021 until her death in early 2025, I spent my Wednesday afternoons and Saturday mornings at her modest 2-bedroom house in Dorchester. The place was simple, almost sparse. Furniture from the 80s, a 32-inch flat-screen TV she'd bought on sale, generic brand everything in the kitchen. Rose lived like money was tight, clipping coupons, buying day-old bread, turning off lights religiously. She drove a beat-up 2012 Honda Civic with rust spots and a temperamental air conditioner. To anyone looking from the outside, Rose Thompson was just another elderly woman living on Social Security and whatever small savings she'd managed to scrape together over the years. If you enjoy stories of cold-blooded revenge and gripping plot twists, like this video and subscribe to the channel now. There are brand new, unreleased stories here every day, each one more intense than the last. My mother Frances had always assumed that when Rose passed away, there might be something left behind. Maybe $20,000 in a savings account, the house itself, some jewelry. Nothing spectacular, but enough to make the funeral expenses worthwhile and perhaps give Victor a small boost as he started his career in finance. Frances had gambling problems that everyone pretended not to notice. The trips to Foxwoods and Mohegan Sun that lasted 3 days, the maxed-out credit cards, the phone calls from collection agencies that she claimed were misunderstandings. But we all knew better. Victor, meanwhile, was building what he thought would be his empire. Fresh out of college in 2022, he'd landed a position at a mid-sized investment firm in downtown Boston, pulling in $85,000 a year. Not bad money, but he acted like he'd conquered Wall Street. He drove a leased 2024 BMW 330i, wore suits that cost more than I made in a month, and talked constantly about his 5-year plan, his networking strategies, his inevitable rise to the top. He had the confidence of someone who'd never been told no, never been questioned, never been anything other than the favorite. Then Rose died on a Tuesday morning in March 2025. Peaceful, in her sleep, just the way she'd always said she wanted to go. The funeral was small, respectful, exactly what she would have wanted. Frances cried appropriately. Victor delivered a eulogy about family legacy and enduring love. I mostly stayed quiet, thinking about those Wednesday afternoons, those conversations about business principles and long-term thinking that I'd never fully understood. The real moment came 2 weeks later, when Rose's attorney, David Morrison, called us all to his office on Beacon Street for the reading of the will. Morrison's office was everything you'd expect from a Boston attorney who'd been practicing estate law for 30 years. Dark wood paneling, leather-bound books, the smell of old paper and expensive coffee. Frances arrived 10 minutes early, dressed in black like she was still in mourning, though I noticed she'd had her nails done the day before. Victor showed up in his work clothes, checking his iPhone 15 every few minutes, making it clear he had more important places to be. I wore the only decent shirt I owned and sat quietly, while Morrison shuffled through papers with the methodical precision of someone who'd done this thousands of times before. He was a thin man in his 60s, with gray hair and wire-rimmed glasses that he adjusted constantly. "Before we begin," Morrison said, I want to clarify that this will was drafted 18 months ago and updated as recently as 6 months before Rose's passing. She was of sound mind throughout the entire process, which was witnessed by 2 independent parties and myself. Francis nodded impatiently. Victor stopped checking his phone. The estate consists of several components, Morrison continued. First, the personal property. The house at 247 Maple Street in Dorchester, appraised at $720,000, along with all furnishings and personal effects contained therein, is bequeathed to Victor Thompson. Victor's face lit up. Francis reached over and squeezed his hand. Additionally, Morrison read, all jewelry, including the diamond engagement ring, pearl necklace, and gold bracelet collection, valued at approximately $8,000, also goes to Victor Thompson. The savings account at Citizens Bank containing $22,467 is likewise bequeathed to Victor Thompson. I watched my mother calculate in her head. The house, the jewelry, the savings. Over $750,000. Real money. Enough to pay off all of her gambling debts and give Victor a genuine head start in life. For Julian Thompson, Morrison continued, and I felt every eye in the room turn toward me. Rose Thompson leaves her business documents, corporate files, and all associated paperwork currently stored in the filing cabinet in her home office. The silence in the room was deafening. Francis looked confused. Victor actually laughed. Business documents? Victor said. What business? Grandma Rose clipped coupons and bought generic cereal. What kind of business could she possibly have had? I said nothing. 3 years of Wednesday afternoons suddenly made sense in a way they never had before. Morrison adjusted his glasses again. That brings us to the second component of the estate. Mrs. Thompson also maintained what we call corporate holdings, which are separate from personal property, and therefore not subject to the same inheritance laws. Corporate holdings? Francis asked. David, what are you talking about? Rose lived on Social Security. She drove a car that was falling apart. Mrs. Thompson was indeed modest in her personal spending, Morrison replied. However, over the past 15 years, she quietly built a portfolio of business investments. 5 separate corporations to be precise. Thompson Logistics, Thompson Real Estate Holdings, Thompson Import Services, Thompson Property Management, and Thompson Investment Group. The room went completely quiet except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. These companies, Morrison continued, have a combined assessed value of approximately $15.2 million. I watched Victor's face go white. Francis gripped the armrests of her chair so hard her knuckles turned the same color. That's impossible, Francis whispered. I have the documentation right here, Morrison said, spreading papers across his desk. Tax returns, incorporation documents, asset valuations, everything properly filed and maintained. Mrs. Thompson was very thorough. But who? Victor started, then stopped. Who runs these companies? Morrison finished. That's where young Julian comes in. For the past 3 years, Julian has been learning the business operations under his grandmother's direct supervision. As of her passing, full ownership and operational control of all 5 companies transfers to Julian Thompson. I felt something inside my chest that I'd never felt before. Not relief, not satisfaction, but a quiet recognition that someone had seen me, really seen me, and decided I was worth something. This can't be legal, Francis said, her voice rising. She was old. She was confused. Julian, you manipulated her, didn't you? You convinced some old woman to sign papers she didn't understand. Morrison pulled out another folder. I anticipated these concerns. Mrs. Thompson underwent comprehensive cognitive testing 6 months before her death. Dr. Patricia Welsh, a geriatric psychiatrist at Massachusetts General, evaluated her mental capacity extensively. I have the complete report here, which confirms that Rose Thompson was of completely sound mind and fully understood the implications of her decisions. He handed me a sealed envelope with my name written in Rose's familiar handwriting. She also left this for Julian, with instructions that it be read aloud if anyone questioned her mental state or motives. My hands trembled slightly as I opened the envelope and unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. Rose's voice seemed to speak directly through her words. Julian, if David is reading this letter, it means someone is questioning whether I knew what I was doing. Let me be clear. I knew exactly what I was doing. I built these companies not for money, but for security. Not for myself, but for the future. You were the only one who showed genuine interest in learning, the only one who listened when I explained why patience and planning matter more than quick profits. Francis has gambling debts that total over $92,000. I've seen the collection notices. The house and jewelry will need to be sold to satisfy her creditors, which means Victor's inheritance will be significantly reduced. I'm not punishing anyone. I'm protecting what I built from being destroyed by poor choices and quick fixes. The companies are yours because you earned them, one Wednesday afternoon at a time. Francis went completely silent. The color drained from her face as the implications hit her. Victor looked like someone had punched him in the stomach. 92,000? Victor asked. Mom, is that true? Francis couldn't meet his eyes. That was answer enough. Morrison cleared his throat. I'm afraid there's more. Mrs. Thompson also documented several liens against the Dorchester property. Apparently, Francis used the house as collateral for various loans over the past 2 years. The total amount owed to creditors is approximately $218,000. What does that mean? Victor asked, though I could see he already understood. It means the house you just inherited comes with debts attached, Morrison explained. Those debts transfer with the property. You'll need to satisfy the liens before you can take clear ownership, and given the house's appraised value versus the amount owed, you're looking at a net inheritance of roughly $502,000. That's before taxes, legal fees, and settlement costs. Victor did the math quickly. So maybe $400,000 total? Approximately, Morrison said. Still a substantial inheritance, but considerably less than the gross value. And the jewelry? Francis asked desperately. Morrison consulted his notes. The jewelry and savings account should remain intact, assuming the property sale covers the outstanding liens. I watched my brother process this information. $400,000 was still life-changing money, but not the $750,000 windfall he'd been calculating moments before. More importantly, it came with the burden of managing a complicated property sale and dealing with creditors. This is insane, Victor said, standing up abruptly. Julian, you knew about this, didn't you? You knew about the companies, about the debts, about all of it. I looked at him calmly. I knew Rose was smart with money. I knew she planned for the future. I didn't know specifics until today. Bull, Francis snapped, finding her voice again. You manipulated an old woman. You spent 3 years poisoning her against her own family. Did I? I asked. Or did I just spend 3 years showing up, learning what she wanted to teach, listening when she talked instead of waiting for her to die so I could collect? The truth hung in the air like smoke. For 3 years, while I was filing papers and making phone calls and learning about business operations, Victor had been building his personal brand, and Francis had been feeding slot machines at the casinos. Rose had watched it all, documented it all, planned for it all. Morrison handed me a thick folder. These are your corporate documents, Julian. Each company has detailed operational procedures, financial statements, and management structures already in place. Mrs. Thompson was very thorough. You'll need to sign some transfer papers, but essentially, you're already running everything. I thought about those Wednesday afternoons differently now. Rose hadn't been giving me busy work. She'd been giving me an education. Every invoice I'd filed, every call I'd made to suppliers, every spreadsheet I'd updated had been preparation for this moment. What exactly do these companies do? Victor asked, his voice hollow. Morrison smiled slightly. Thompson Logistics handles freight coordination for several major retailers. Thompson Real Estate owns 12 rental properties throughout Greater Boston. Thompson Import Services manages supply chains for 3 restaurant groups. Thompson Property Management oversees commercial buildings downtown. And Thompson Investment Group, well, that's where Mrs. Thompson kept her market portfolio. $15 million, Francis whispered. 15.2 million, Morrison corrected, as of last quarter's valuation. Victor slumped back into his chair. The golden boy who'd never faced real disappointment, who'd coasted through life on charm and assumptions, suddenly looked overwhelmed by the complexity of what he'd inherited. There has to be something we can do, Francis said. Some way to contest this, it's not fair. Julian got everything and Victor got stuck with complications. Actually, Morrison said, Victor received exactly what Mrs. Thompson intended him to have. The personal property, the family home, the savings account. The business assets were never part of the traditional estate. They were always separate corporate entities. But she knew, Victor said quietly. She knew about the liens. She knew it wouldn't be simple. Mrs. Thompson was aware of the financial complications, yes, Morrison confirmed. She was also aware that those complications were the direct result of choices made by family members. Her letter makes that quite clear. I stood up and shook Morrison's hand. Thank you for handling this professionally. Your grandmother was a remarkable woman, he said. She understood that true inheritance isn't just about money. It's about preparation, responsibility, and earning what you receive. Francis and Victor remained seated as I walked toward the door. I could feel their stares, their confusion, their resentment. But for the first time in my life, I didn't care what they thought about me. Julian, Victor called out as I reached the doorway. Turned around. What are you going to do, he asked. I'm going to run the companies, I said, the way Rose taught me, carefully, honestly, for the long term. And us? I looked at my brother, then at my mother. Two people who'd spent my entire life making me feel invisible, unwanted, unnecessary. You'll figure it out, I said. You always do. Walking out of Morrison's office that day was like stepping into a completely different life. The Boston streets looked the same, but I felt fundamentally changed. Not because I was suddenly wealthy, but because someone had seen value in me when I couldn't see it in myself. The first few weeks were overwhelming. Rose had left detailed instructions for everything, but taking theoretical knowledge and applying it to real business decisions was terrifying. I spent long nights in her old home office, which was now truly mine, reading through contracts and financial reports. The filing cabinet that had seemed so ordinary during those Wednesday afternoons turned out to contain 15 years of meticulous records. Every decision documented, every transaction explained, every strategy mapped out for the future. Thompson Logistics was the most complex operation. Rose had built relationships with major retailers like Target and Home Depot, coordinating freight shipments across New England. The profit margins were thin, but the volume was enormous. Thompson Real Estate was steadier. 12 properties generating consistent rental income of roughly $48,000 monthly. The import business served 3 high-end restaurant groups in Cambridge and Somerville, handling specialty ingredients and equipment. But Thompson Investment Group was Rose's masterpiece. She'd been quietly playing the stock market for over a decade, not with risky day trading or speculation, but with patient, research-driven investments in solid companies. Her portfolio read like a textbook on conservative wealth building: diversified holdings, dividend-paying stocks, municipal bonds, and a small but valuable collection of real estate investment trusts. I learned all this gradually, with help from the managers Rose had hired over the years. People like Sarah Kim, who ran the logistics operation, and Robert Martinez, who handled property management. They were professionals who respected Rose's methods and seemed willing to work with me, though I could see them evaluating whether I had what it took to maintain what she'd built. Meanwhile, Francis and Victor were dealing with their own reality. The house sale process became a nightmare of legal complications. The liens were more complex than Morrison had initially explained, involving multiple creditors with competing claims. Francis had to hire her own attorney, which ate into whatever money might have remained from the eventual sale. Victor's inheritance shrank week by week as legal fees mounted, and the true scope of Francis's debts became clear. I heard about their struggles through family friends, not directly. Francis stopped speaking to me entirely. Victor made a few attempts at reconciliation, Phone calls where he alternated between anger and pleading. Could I help with the legal fees? Could I loan him money to keep his apartment while the house sale dragged on? Could I at least talk to Frances about getting help for her gambling problem? I kept my responses brief and honest. The companies were doing well, but they required constant attention. I wasn't in a position to fund anyone else's mistakes. If Victor needed financial stability, he should focus on his career instead of counting on family bailouts. By July 2025, the full scope of their situation became clear. The house sale netted Victor roughly $380,000 after all debts and fees were satisfied. Frances's bankruptcy eliminated most of her remaining gambling debts, but destroyed her credit rating and forced her to move in with Victor temporarily. His BMW lease payments became a serious strain on his budget without the anticipated windfall. The downtown apartment he'd been planning to upgrade became a shared space he could barely afford. The 5-year plan dissolved into careful budgeting and reality checks. I didn't take pleasure in their struggles, but I didn't feel guilty about them either. Rose had been right about consequences. Frances's gambling hadn't been a victimless mistake. Victor's assumptions hadn't been harmless overconfidence. They'd made choices, and those choices had led them exactly where they were. Meanwhile, Thompson Logistics landed 2 new contracts worth over $600,000 annually. Thompson Real Estate acquired a 13th property in Newton. The investment portfolio grew by 8% in 6 months. Rose's systems worked because they were built on sustainable principles: provide real value, maintain strong relationships, plan for the long term, and never risk more than you can afford to lose. I moved out of my cramped apartment in Alston and bought a modest 3-bedroom house in Arlington. Nothing flashy, but clean and comfortable with a proper home office. I drove a reliable 2024 Toyota Camry and dressed in decent but unremarkable business clothes. The goal wasn't to show off wealth, but to build on what Rose had started. One evening in September 2025, almost 6 months after the will reading, Victor called me. His voice sounded different. Tired, maybe, but also more honest than I'd heard in years. "Julian," he said, "I think I understand now what Grandma Rose was trying to teach us." "What's that?" I asked. "That inheritance isn't just about money. It's about earning the right to carry something forward." "She would have been proud to hear you say that. Would you consider letting me work for one of the companies? Not as a favor, but as an employee. I'd start at the bottom, prove myself properly." I thought about it for a long moment. The old Julian might have said yes immediately, desperate for family approval. The new Julian considered it more carefully. "Send me your resume," I said finally. "If there's a position that matches your skills, we'll talk. But understand, you'd be working for the company, not for me. Same standards as everyone else." "I understand," Victor said. "Thank you." After hanging up, I sat in Rose's old chair and looked at the framed photo on the desk. Rose at 75, smiling in her simple garden behind the Dorchester house. She'd known exactly what she was doing. Not revenge, but justice. Not punishment, but consequences. Not cruelty, but the kind of tough love that builds character instead of destroying it. Frances never called. I heard through neighbors that she'd found work at a grocery store in Medford and was attending Gamblers Anonymous meetings twice a week. Small steps, but in the right direction. As for me, I learned something about inheritance that they don't teach in business school. The most valuable thing you can leave someone isn't money or property. It's the knowledge of how to create value, how to build something lasting, how to turn good judgment into sustainable success. Rose had given me $15 million, but more importantly, she'd given me $15 million worth of education in how to keep it. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video and leave a comment telling me what you thought. And if you're not already subscribed to the channel, please subscribe and hit the notification bell to receive alerts about new stories like this one. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.